down, his hands firmly gripping her shoulders to keep her pinned in place. Evie's instincts kicked in immediately, thinking she pulled out her phone and dialed 911-911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher answered promptly. I need an ambulance at the Montreal Music Festival, Evie said, her voice urgent but controlled. Behind the maintenance building, a woman is having what looks like seizures. And hey, who are you? What are you doing here? Troy's voice cut through her call as he noticed her presence. Evie backed away. As Troy stood up and started toward her, you tried to kill her, she shouted, pointing at Paisley's shaking form on the ground. Troy's face contorted with rage and fear. You don't know what you're talking about, he snarled, advancing on her. Get out of here. Evie continued backing away, her phone still connected to the emergency. Dispatcher, please help. She called into the phone. I'm at the festival behind the maintenance building. A woman needs medical attention immediately. Evie, a voice called from behind her. What's going on? Evie turned to see Diana and the event organizer hurrying toward her, concern evident on their faces. Troy stopped in his tracks, clearly alarmed by the arrival of more witnesses. He looked frantically from Evie to Diana to see organizer, then back at Paisley, who continued to convulse on the ground. This is a misunderstanding, he began, his tone abruptly shifting to something more controlled. My wife is having an allergic reaction. I was trying to help her. The organizer reached for her radio. I'm calling security, she said, her voice firm. No, wait, Troy. He was interrupted by the arrival of two security guards responding to the organizer's call. What's happening, Gare? One of them demanded while Troy attempted to explain the situation to the security guards. Evie rushed past them to Paisley's side. The woman's face was swollen, her breathing shallow and strained, and her body trembled with involuntary movements, clear, unmistakable signs of anaphylaxis, instantly recognizable to Evie. Her daughter Marissa had once suffered from this too. She's having a severe alert, Evie announced, opening her purse. She needs epinephrine immediately. To everyone's surprise, Evie pulled out an EpiPen. I'm allergic to bee stings, she explained quickly. I always carry this. Without hesitation, she turned Paisley onto her side and administered the injection into the woman's thigh, holding it there for the required time before moving it. The effect wasn't immediate, but gradually, Paisley's breathing began to ease and the convulsions subsided. She coughed weakly, her eyes fluttering as Evie cradled the woman's head. She had her first close look at the headband that had triggered her memories on the train up close. There was no mistaking it, the exact pattern, the orange guitar graphic, even a small stain on one edge that Evie remembered trying desperately to remove all those years ago. A realization dawned on her, so shocking that she nearly dropped Paisley's head. Mary Blaze. Evie whispered the word, escaping her lips before she could stop it. Paisley, still dazed from her reaction, froze. At the word, her eyes, previously unfocused, suddenly locked onto Ever's face. What did you say? She asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Evie pointed tough, small stain on the headband. I tried to wipe that stain so hard but it wouldn't come out, she said, her voice trembling. It was so stubborn we even brought it to the bathroom and tried to wash it with soap, but it wouldn't disappear. Paisley's eyes widened in shock and recognition. You were so disappointed because you had just gotten that headband from your favorite band, Velvet Blaze. Evie continued, tears beginning to stream down her face. To cheer you up, I called it Mari Blaze from Marissa, your name, and Velvet Blaze. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the festival and the approaching sirens. Oh, fun! Ambulance responding to Evie's 911 call. Paisley's expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to something far more painful, anger. She pulled away from Evie, forcing herself upright despite the visible strain. Who are you, Mary? Me, Evie, your mother. Paisley shook her head slowly, her eyes brimming with horror. If you're really my mother, where were you, and what are you doing here? She asked, her voice cracking. Why did you leave me that night? They told me you didn't want me anymore. The accusation struck Evie like a physical blow. Leave you, Marissa? I never left you. You got lost in the crowd. I searched everywhere for you. I never stopped searching, even after the police and everyone else gave up. Paisley, or Marissa as Evie now knew her to shook her head in disbelief. I'm Paisley now. If you kept searching for me you would have found him, she said bitterly. By now a small crowd had formed Troy, the security guards, Diana, the event organizer, and several fans who had come for the meet and greet. All eyes were fixed on the unfolding scene between Evie and the woman known as Paisley Williams. Who told you that? Evie asked, her voice breaking. Who told you I abandoned you? Paisley's gaze shifted to Troy, who stood a few feet away, his face a mask of controlled concern that didn't reach his eyes. You, she said, her voice gaining strength as she pointed accusingly at her husband. You always told me my mother abandoned method. You found me and helped me. Her eyes narrowed, and just now you tried to kill Troy's facade, cracked slightly. What the hell is this? He demanded, looking around at the onlookers. This is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to save my wife when this woman he pointed at, Evie, got in the way. Cut the Paisley snapped. You had to have put something in my breakfast. That's why I collapsed on stage, why I suddenly got dizzy. Then you dragged me out here from the nap room and didn't even help. You restrained me. You knew about my allergy and made sure I didn't have my bag with my EpiPen. The arrival of police officers to the disturbance added to the tension as they approached. Troy's adminer became increasingly agitated. She's delusional from the reaction, Hein insisted to the officers. I was trying to help her. Evie stepped forward. That's not true, she said firmly. I saw him earlier, paying his bodyguards for something. She pulled out her phone and I saw him with a young woman behind the same building, exchanging what looked like drugs and being timid. Paisley's eyes widened in disbelief. You did what she breathed. Stunned, Evie showed the blurry photos she had captured earlier to the police. While not clear enough to be definitive proof, they were suggestive enough to raise serious questions. One of the police officers turned to the bodyguards who had remained nearby. Is this true? Did he pay you for something? The bodyguards exchanged in unison glances, their loyalty clearly faltering under the weight of police scrutiny, when Paisley urged them to tell the truth, reminding them that their allegiance was to the band, not just to Troy. One of them finally stepped forward. Paid us too. He hesitated, then continued to get rid of her body. Take it to the forest, where no one would find her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, which he handed to the officer. He gave us this as a down payment. There's more. When the job was done, the revelation sent a ripple of shock through the gathered crowd. The police officers moved quickly to restrain Troy, who suddenly seemed to realize the gravity of his situation. As they handcuffed him and read him his rights, his composure completely broke down. You're getting uglier every year, he yelled at Paisley. Look at you with that horn, that tattoo all over your body. He told you. I don't like them. You're a monster, a wretched woman who can't even show gratitude. His voice grew louder, more desperate as the officers began to lead him away. I found you lost in that Manchester concert 25 years ago with my friends. I was just a young man back then, 20 years old, and you were 10. We took you in because you looked so cute and had a beautiful voice and face. The officers attempted to silence, warning that anything he said could be used against him, but Troy no longer cared. The lead officer raised a hand to halt the others, allowing Troy to speak. It was supposed to be just a fun thing before I helped you return to your parents, he continued, but the more I heard you sing, the more I wanted to keep you. For my band that me and my friends were just working on, we had a studio, so we kept you there all the time. Evie felt sick listening to the confession, imagining her daughter held captive by a group of young men with no concern for the devastation they had caused. You kept crying for your mother, Troy went on, and we were afraid, so we told you your mother abandoned you so you'd be quiet, but we were nice to you. We trained you, perfected your pitch, you became part of our team and family. His voice took on a reminiscent quality, as if he were telling a fond story rather than confessing to a kidnapping. When you got older, we knew who couldn't keep you there, so we had to move you somewhere. You wouldn't hear about your mother looking for you to Canada. It was a long process, but someone helped us, one of my friend's family, to falsify all your documents. But then our band got disintegrated because that family got caught by police. I feared the police would find you based on the track documents, so I left across the country and formed a new band, Glass Saints. His final words were hurled over his shoulder as he was pushed into the back of the police vehicle. Don't blame me, Paisley. You never searched for your mother. You just believed everything we told you, and you married me because you said you loved me, but now you're just uproad ugly pig. The police car door closed on his tirade, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. One of the remaining officers addressed the crowd. We'll need statements from all witnesses for now. This area is a police investigation. He turned to the event organizer. I'm afraid the Glass Saints performance. When a new patient arrived at the dentist's clinic, accompanied by what seemed to be her boyfriend, the doctor immediately sensed that something was off as she sat in the chair and opened her mouth. The dentist gasped at what he saw. The young woman had no teeth, only metal implants, and swollen gums remained after a failed attempt to help her. During the appointment, the dentist made a bold decision to follow her after work. Wait, he discovered revealed a horrifying truth far worse than he could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The left afternoon sun cast long shadows across the streets of Sacramento, its golden light softening the edges of their buildings and painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. At precisely 5 o'clock p.m., Dr. Paul Revere stood in the doorway of his private dental practice, a converted Victorian house that had seen better days, but still contained an air of quiet dignity. The 50-year-old dentist's salt and pepper hair caught the fading sunlight as he bid farewell to his last scheduled patient of the day. "Thank you again, doctor," the patient said, adjusting his jaw as if testing out the feeling of his newly cleaned teeth. "I always dread coming to the dentist, but you make it bearable." Paul smiled warmly, the corners of his eyes crinkling behind his wire-rimmed glasses. That's what I'm here for, remember, floss daily, and I'll see you in 6 months." As the patient made his way down worn concrete steps, Paul's attention was drawn to two figures approaching from the opposite direction, a man and a woman walking close together but with a palpable tension between them. There was a mything about their demeanor that caught Paul's eye, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Dr. Paul's eyes crinkled slightly behind his wire-rimmed glasses as he observed the couple years of experience had honed his ability to read people, and something about this couple set off a quiet alarm in the back of his mind. With a slight shake of his head, he turned back into the clinic, making his way to his practice room to prepare for what he assumed would be another patient. The familiar scent of antiseptic and mint greeted him as he entered the room. His nurse assistant Rena was already there, meticulously sanitizing the dental chair and equipment. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her movements were efficient and practiced the methodical sounds of her work. The soft swish of disinfectant wipes, the clink of metal instruments, being arranged created a soothing rhythm that Paul had grown accustomed to over the years. As he settled behind his desk, Paul's gaze drifted to the darkened window. Through the tinted glass, he could make out the silhouettes of the man and woman he had seen earlier. They were now at the reception desk, the scratching of pen on paper. Even from where he sat, his brow furrowed as he watched the woman's posture. Her shoulders were slumped, her body language radiating discomfort and a lack of confidence. "Rena," Paul called out softly, not wanting to startle his assistant. "Have you seen those two before?" "I can't recall having them as patients." Rena paused in her work, looking up at Paul with her warm brown eyes. "No, Dr. Paul," she replied, her voice slightly by her medical mark. "I believe they're first-time patients," her wretched receptionist would have mentioned if we had their records on file. Paul nodded, his curiosity piqued, headed his attention back to his computer, quickly finishing up the report. For his previous patient, the familiar routine of typing up notes and observations helped to ground him, even as his mind wandered back to the cupline in the waiting room. Once he was done, Paul swiveled in his chair to face Ree. "Is everything ready for our next patient?" he asked, his tone professional but kind. "Yes, Dr. Paul," Rena confirmed with a nod. "All instruments are sterilized and the chair is prepped and sanitized." With a satisfied nod, Paul refreshed the computer system. The new patient information appeared on the screen, and he took a moment to familiarize himself with the name Miss Mona Collins. Taking a deep breath, he stood up and made his way to the door. "Miss Mona Collins," he called out, his voice carrying clearly into the waiting area. The woman he had observed earlier stood up, followed closely by the man who appeared to be her boyfriend. As they approached, Paul put on his most welcoming smile, gesturing for them to enter the practice room. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a accentuating the nervous expression on Mona's face as they entered. The boyfriend immediately spoke up, his tone brooking no argument. "I need a chair. I'm staying with her during the examination." Paul noticed Rena's slight frown, her disapproval evident. Even behind her mask, she pulled a chair to the corner of the room, but the man adjusted it, moving it closer to the dental chair, where Mona was settling in. Paul cleared his throat, his professionalism kicking in despite the attention in the room. "Sir, I'll need some space to work. Would you mind moving back a bit?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. The boyfriend's expression darkened momentarily, but he complied, albeit reluctantly. Paul exhaled slowly, centering himself. He had dealt with all of patients and situations over the years, so he shouldn't let this one unnerved and pushing all negative thoughts aside. He focused on the task at hand, providing care for the woman in front of him. The soft hum of the overhead light filled the room. As Dr. Paul switched on his headlamp, the bright beam illuminating Mona's face. He slipped on a pair of latex gloves, the material snapping against his wrists with a familiar sound. The cool, sterile scent of the gloves mingled with the antiseptic air of the examination room, creating an atmosphere that was at once clinical and oddly comforting. Rena, ever-efficient, handed Paul his mouth mirror. The metal was cool against his palm. Even through the latex barrier of his gloves, Paul could feel the weight of the boyfriend's gaze on him, heavy and oppressive in the small room. "All right, Miss Collins," Paul said, his voice gentle and reassuring. He modulated his tone, carefully aware of the tension radiating from both Mona and her companion. "Could you please open your mouth for me?" Mona complied, her movements hesitant as Poland in the beam from his headlamp, revealing the interior of her mouth. He felt his breath catch in his throat where he had expected to see teeth. There was nothing but empty gums. The pink tissue was marred with metal implants, a stark reminder of teeth long gone. Paul's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing in all his years of practice. He had never encountered a case quite like this in Samian. So young. He glanced at Mona's face, noting the fear and embarrassment in her eyes. They were a deep, rich brown, but clouded with an emotion Paul couldn't quite place. Was it shame, fear, or something else entirely? "Miss Collins," he said, his voice carefully controlled. He was acutely aware of the boyfriend's presence, a looming shadow in the periphery of his vision. "Can you tell me how the happened?" Mona's eyes darted to her boyfriend before she answered. Paul noticed the slight tremor in her hand. She gripped the armrests of the dental chair. When she spoke, her voice was breathy and difficult to understand with the teeth. "I had a really bad accident a few months ago." She began, her words slurred and hesitant. "I was ice skating, trying to catch my balance. After slipping, I fell and knocked all my teeth out." Paul's brow furrowed. Ice skating in Sacramento, and in this weather? The explanation seemed implausible, but before he could voice his confusion, the boyfriend chimed in. "It was at an indoor ice skating ring," he explained, his tone casual but firm. Paul winced, imagining the pain of such a fall. The image of Mona's face colliding with unforgiving ice flashed through his mind, making him shudder. Internally, "That must have been terribly painful," he said sympathetically. "You're lucky you didn't bite your tongue in accidents like that. It's not uncommon to lose more than just teeth." The woman's eyes widened in fear, but her boyfriend chuckled, the sound oddly out of place in the tense atmosphere of the room. Paul's unease grew, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. As he continued his examination, Paul noticed the titillations of previous dental work. The metal implants in Mona's gums were evidence of a procedure that should have resulted in a full set of functioning teeth, yet here she was completely toothless. "I see you've had implants before," he observed, keeping his tone neutral. "Can you tell me about that?" Mona nodded, her eyes once again flicking to her boyfriend before she spoke. Paul noticed the subtle shift in her body language, the way she seemed to shrink into herself even more. "Last month, I had all my teeth repaired and got fake teeth put in," she explained haltingly, "but it was poorly done. The implants started to fall out and some even broke. We didn't want to go back to that dentist, so that's why I came here." Paul's concern deepened. While it wasn't unheard of for dental work to fail, the extent of the damage he was seeing was unusual, to say the least. He needed more information. "Can you tell me how you lost all your fake teeth?" he asked gently, aware of the delicate nature of the situation. Mona hesitated, her gaze on Sigain, seeking out her boyfriend. Paul noticed the almost imperceptible eyebrow nod the man gave, as if granting permission for her to speak. "It was during a barbecue last month," she said finally. "I was chewing cow meats and corn, and they started to loosen that night. I found my teeth were shaky, and by more warning they had fallen out." Paul considered her explanation. While not impossible, it was highly improbable for even poorly done implants to fail so catastrophically from normal eating. Still, he didn't want to dismiss her story outright. "Do you grind your teeth when you sleep?" he asked, searching for any additional factors that might explain the extensive damage. I don't," Mona replied, her voice small and uncertain. "Please, can you just fix my teeth? I've been eating nothing but watery food for a month." The desperation in her voice tugged at Paul's heart. Whatever the true cause of her dental issues, it was clear that Mona was suffering. As a healthcare professional, his primary duty was to help her regardless of the circumstances that had led her to this way. Paul glanced between Mona and her boyfriend, acutely aware of the man's watchful gaze. The situation was far from normal, but he pushed his suspicions aside, for now his focus had to be on examining and fixing Mona's teeth. Without proper dental function, she would be at risk of malnutrition and other health issues. With that in mind, Helen to take a closer look at the remnants of Mona's previous dental work, determined to find a solution to her immediate problem. As he continued the examination, the clinical silence of the practice room was broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning and the occasional clink of dental instruments. Dr. Paul leaned in closer, his trained eyes scrutinizing every detail of the metal implants embedded in Mona's skims. After several minutes of thorough observation, Paul straightened up, removing his gloves. With a soft snap, the sound seemed to echo in the quiet room, causing Mona to flinch slightly. Paul took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts before speaking. The weight of what he was about to say settled heavily on his shoulders. "Collins," he began, his tone professional yet compassionate. He chose his words carefully, aware of the boyfriend's watchful gaze. "To do this properly, we'll need to remove the existing metal implants. This will require sedation." Mona's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear crossing her face. Paul continued, his voice steady and reassuring. "After that, we'll put in new salon for implants for both jaws. This is a comprehensive solution that will be..." Before he could finish his explanation, the boyfriend interjected, his voice low but carrying an undercurrent of barely suppressed anger. "Just hurry up and get it done." He said the words, coming out in a rush. "We've already wasted enough time and money." Paul paused, taken aback by the man's abrupt interruption. He glanced at the boyfriend, noting the tense set of his shoulders and the way his fingers strummed impatiently on the arm of his chair. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an expectation. "I understand your concern," Paul said calmly, addressing the boyfriend. He maintained eye contact, his voice level, despite the unease churning in his stomach. "However, this is a complex procedure that requires careful planning and execution. Rushing it could lead to complications." The boyfriend's jaw clenched, visibly a muscle twitching in his cheek. "How much?" he demanded, his tone brusque. Paul took a moment to collect his thoughts, mentally calculating the expenses involved. He was acutely aware of the delicate balance he needed to strike, providing accurate information while navigating the palpable tension. "Interim, the metal removal and sedation would be $1.00. He began, keeping his tone neutral. "Thon for the full-mouth dental implants. The most cost-effective option is to use 4 to 6 implants per arch. That's fourth upper and lower jaw. To support a permanent denture, the Allen for implants for both jaws will cost $40.00. This is actually the cheapest option. Individual implants for all teeth would double the price." As Paul spoke, he watched the boyfriend's face darken, his expression morphing from impatience to barely contained fury. The man's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Mona, still reclined in the dental chair, seemed to shrink into herself, her eyes darting nervously between Paul and her boyfriend. The silence that followed Paul's explanation was deafening. He could hear the soft hum of the equipment, muffled sounds of traffic outside, and his own heart pounding in his ears. The tension in the room was palpable, like a tightly coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. Finally, the boyfriend spoke, his tight with barely contained frustration. "All right," he said, the word coming out like a growl. "Let's just get this over with." Paul nodded, relieved that the tension seemed to be dissipating, if only slightly. He knew, however, that they were far from out of thoughts. "Of course," he said, his voice calm and professional. "However, given the extent of the procedure and its cost, we'll need to handle the payment details first. If you could follow Nurse Rena to the reception area, we can take care of that while I prepare for the procedure." The boyfriend stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made Mona flinch. Paul watched as he followed Rena out of the room, his gut stiffed and his hands clenched at his sides. As soon as they rounded the corner, Paul quickly closed the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of concern and determination. He turned back to Mona, who sat small and vulnerable in the large dental chair. Now was his chance to get to the bottom of the situation. As he approached her, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The makeup on Mona's cheek had smudged slightly where his glove had rested on her cheek earlier, revealing the edge of what looked unmistakable like a bruise. In that moment, all the pieces began to fall into place: the woman's nervousness, the boyfriend's controlling behavior, the improbable story about the lost teeth. Paul's medical training and years of experience told him that he was looking at a case of domestic abuse. He knew he had to act quick. Live boyfriend would only be gone for a short time, and this might be his only chance to help the woman. Dr. Paul's heart raced as he looked at Mona, her small form dwarfed by the large dental chair. He pulled up his stool. Sitting down beside Mona at eye level, the overhead light cast shadows across her face, accentuating the hollows under her eyes and the tension in her jaw. Paul took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Collins," he began gently, his voice barely above a whisper. The quietness of his tone seemed to fill the room, creating an intimate bubble around them. "I need you to tell me the truth." He paused, watching Mona's face. "For any reaction, I noticed the bruise under your makeup is everything." "All right, Athom." Mona's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she quickly composed herself. Her hands, which had been resting in her lap, began to fidget with the hem of her shirt. "Very thing I told you is the truth, Dr. Revere," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "Nothing is wrong, my boyfriend. He's a loving man." Paul's heart sank at her denial, but pressed on, driven by a mix of professional duty and genuine concern. "I understand you're scared," he said softly. He wanted to reach out to offer some physical comfort, but he knew that might be too much. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice low and earnest. "But I want you to know that you don't have to be. I'm here to help you, and this can stop now. You're safe here." Mona remained silent, her eyes fixed on her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Paul could see the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her knuckles turned white from the force of her grip. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out in the tense silence. Paul took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he needed to ask next. "Mona," he said, using her first name to establish a more personal connection. "Why sit? Your boyfriend who did this to your teeth, did he hurt you?" The silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Paul held his breath, watching Mona's face for any reaction. He could see the internal struggle playing out in her eyes. Fear, shame, and something that might have been a flicker of hope. Finally, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. The confirmation hit Paul like a physical blow, despite his suspicion. Sharing it, confirmed, made the situation all too real. He felt a surge of anger towards the man who's currently in their reception, mixed with an overwhelming desire to protect the vulnerable woman before him. "I'm going to call the police now," Paul said, his voice firm but gentle, needed to convey both authority and compassion. "Everything will be okay. I'll support you through this, and the police will take my word very seriously because I'm a medical expert." Mona looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and something that might have been hope. She didn't speak, but she didn't object either. Paul took that as tacit permission to proceed with steady hands that belied his inner turmoil. Paul walked to his desk and picked up the landline phone. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as he dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Mona as he waited for the call to connect. 911, "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice came through the line, a lifeline in the storm of emotions whirling through the room. "This is Dr. Paul Revere at Riv Dental Clinic on 5th Street. Paul began, his voice but clear. He was acutely aware of Mona watching him, her body tense as if ready to flee at any moment. "I have a patient here who, I believe, is a victim of domestic abuse. Her boyfriend is in the waiting room." And suddenly the door burst open with a bang that made both Paul and Mona jump. The boyfriend stood in the doorway, his face contorted with rage behind him. Raina was trying to pull him back, her usually calm demeanor